I think we're going to get started. Hopefully everyone's settled in. Welcome everyone. I am Janelle Tischer, Vice President of Category Solutions of the Walt Disney Company and first Vice President of the Adcraft Club of Detroit. Founded in 1905, Adcraft is the oldest nonprofit marketing association in the nation and is considered a model for other organizations in our industry. We accomplish this through education, professional development programs like today, Detroit's Creative Awards show, the D Show, and scholarships that help fuel the next generation of marketing professionals. None of this happens without you and the collective support of the entire Detroit marketing community. On behalf of the entire Adcraft Board of Directors, thank you for your continued support. We have a great program planned for you today as we continue our GM webinar series with Megan Stooke. If you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to make sure you register for our final webinar as we close out the series with Deborah Wall a week from today. You definitely don't want to miss out. A few thank yous are in order. First, I'd like to thank Adcraft board member Robbie Hucka for making today's event possible. Thank you, Robbie. As a nonprofit, we couldn't do all that we do to keep Detroit's marketing industry connected without the support of our sponsors. Thank you to our premier sponsors of the GM webinar series, McCann Detroit, MRM, Commonwealth McCann, and Weber Shandwick. Today's fireside chat will be moderated by Grant Theron, Chief Executive Officer of Commonwealth Detroit. Thank you for helping us today, Grant. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker, Megan Stooke. Inspired to attract the next generation of automotive consumers, Megan leads the strategic marketing effort for General Motors brand. In this time of exponential disruption and growth, GM is laying the foundation for an all-electric future and really redefining the boundaries of mobility. Megan believes the personalized ownership experiences together with new business models will quickly transform the car buying journey and process. Megan joined GM with the company's Australian subsidiary, Holden, and in 2005, she moved to Detroit and has held many marketing leadership positions at GM with Chevrolet, Hummer, Cadillac, as well as GM's global marketing operations. Please help me give a warm Adcraft welcome to Megan and Grant. Guys, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Really appreciate that. I do wish that we were actually sitting next to a fire to do this, but beggars can't be choosers, I guess. Hello, Megan. Nice to see you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Grant.
So I wonder, I think this might be the first time that they've had two Antipodeans doing this type of thing. It must be a first. Now, you've done it before, but to have two of us at the same time is sort of I think we're breaking new ground. I think it's pretty good. So to kick off, I just want to sort of lay out some of the ground rules that we established, or the rules of engagement we established yesterday. The first is there's not going to be any softball questions, right? And the second is we're going to move super quick. In fact, the only softball question that we're going to give you is to give you a couple of minutes just to tell us a little bit about yourself, some things that are important to you, and then we're going to go straight into the agenda and start to fire off some questions. And actually, I'd ask the audience, if you feel like I'm asking too many softball questions, call me out, write it in the Q&A. Really happy to see it, and I'll try and up the pressure on Megan to answer some more difficult questions. So over to you, Megan, for a bit.
Thank you. Well, that's actually probably the hardest thing, is talking about myself. And for those of you, and I know, many of you in the industry, I love bringing my full self every day, and I don't mind talking about my life. I don't like talking about myself, but I grew up in Australia, and I think that really forms the foundation of, a lot of how I view things and how I go about, leading. And the Australian culture, it's very, well, we're a penal colony, but we are very open-minded. We really much believe that everyone deserves, a fair go. And so we're actually pretty tough on ourselves. We don't like, tall poppies. We're obsessed with sport. We love a drink. And, whilst that's a bit of, lightheartedness, I very much grew up in the, middle class, my family living what was the Australian dream, and, faced many challenges. But personally, those challenges were never seen as anything but, positive and you know, I grew up with, I can still hear my mum's words of advice every day. Never give up. If first you don't succeed, try again. And I hear myself now speaking to my son like that, but was taught the values of hard work. My parents had very high expectations. But overall, I think that I was taught how to be adaptable.
Yeah, I was thinking about how I would answer this question, and it's amazing how much of an influence parents can have. I remember I grew up in South Africa. So for those of you that don't know, Australian South Africans are enormously competitive in all things sports and drinking. But I was discouraged from asking questions. It's a really strange thing. So, you know, curiosity was something that was appreciated, but when I asked questions, I was sort of discouraged from doing so. And I found my solace in books. And in a weird way, I'm actually thankful that I was discouraged, because I found such a rich, you know, place to experience things around the world through books. So I kind of lied, because I want to transition to another somewhat softball question, which is, maybe it isn't actually, come to think of it, like, what is your job? Because it was explained in the beginning, but like, what is it?
So it's pretty exciting. And for those of you who are close to the automotive industry, obviously appreciate that GM as a brand and as a company is pretty unique, because we don't sell GMs. And so faced with where we're at now, really my role is, and obviously working with, you know, a massive team, but really the opportunity to bring the GM brand and that enterprise into the public eye and change public opinion in the best way possible. And to do that, make it fresh and modern and show really the totality of the enterprise that GM is, and really doing that so that it's relevant from, you know, Main Street to Wall Street. And so working, you know, with the team to really bring GM's vision of 000 to life today.
Yeah, it's a hell of a task. And, you know, when I think of you, there's so many different ways I would describe you, because I'm often asked, and I would say that you're sort of an entrepreneur wrapped up in a strategist body with a cap that says COO on it. You know, like this unique blend of characters all in one, which is kind of interesting. But I'd say a label on you. You seem pretty fearless, right? Like I see you wading into conversations that can be really quite tough. Does that fear come from like fear itself? Like, do you find yourself fearful, or does it come from another place? Like, where does it come from?
Well, I definitely don't like to fail, but I also understand, and, you know, it's taken me time to learn. And I think I love the opportunity with you just to reflect and the psychoanalysis of all of this. But I do recognize that failing is what is part of success. And so I think that I definitely am passionate about the end state. And to that end, you know, it really is about perseverance and effort and grit, and just that focus on the end goal.
Yeah, but I want to dig on it a little bit, because, you know, I feel self-doubt, and, you know, and if those of you are familiar with the term imposter syndrome, I mean, as a South African, you know, as an expat, I came into this country completely fresh, didn't really understand the culture, and Americans are almost trained from birth to be supremely confident, right? So I go into this sort of self-doubt mode when I'm in meetings or whatever, where my logic flow and my style don't necessarily match up to what's happening around me. So I get this sort of self-doubt creeping in, you know, it sort of sits in the back of my head. I'm like, am I doing what I should be doing? And it can be daunting. So does doubt creep in at all? Does that affect you? Like, how do you handle doubt? Because I mean, you're on the forefront of, I mean, you're running, you know, the GM brand, and that's a hell of a thing. Does doubt creep in, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for sure. And like you say, there's when you come from outside and you can see sort of the confidence with which so many, you know, the cultural differences. And I remember when I was doing my cultural training, and there was something like, you know, Americans are just so rah, you know, it's this wow out there. And like Australians and South Africans probably more, yes, like, you know, we have that sort of more inner, you know, inner drive. But definitely from, you know, I truly believe that visualization and managing your mind, and spent a lot of time sort of focused on visualization. And I truly believe that you attract what you project. Personally, and those of you who know, I have an adopted son who, you know, I for years just visualized myself as a mum, and it came in a very different way. But in doing that, also in business, visualizing and just focused on what things are going to look like. And so between visualization and then self-talk, and so I can't see anyone, which is really frustrating for me, but you know, Grant, we talked about, do you talk to yourself? You know, and it's like, I can see you might, like, so for those of you who are sitting there and thinking, do I talk to myself? Yes, I do. So you probably all do, but I think that whole positive reinforcement and self-talk, and just that the ability to, you know, visualize. And often in the mornings, I'll visualize, if I've got a presentation, I was visualizing, you know, today and what that looks like, and going through it in my mind's eye. So that's some skills that I do use.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I might have told you this, but anybody that's seen me go into a presentation, I'm super awkward, because I'll walk into a conference room and I'll make sure I'm alone. But have you heard of the winner's pose? So just when you sort of act like you've run across a finishing line, and I actually use it all the time, because it's sort of in your brain, it tells you you've already won, and so it just takes your confidence level. That's how I deal with doubt. It's sort of one of those little tricks. And going into a sort of mindset, and this is where I really want to start to probe a little bit more. Myself and actually my strategy partner, Diana, we constantly watch you sort of work through concepts in a really interesting way. You sort of look at things at opposites almost simultaneously. So you look at a problem and you look at it from both angles equally, without sort of having a bias. And I actually had to look it up, because I, you know, try to train the creators on how to sell work to you, which is a secret I probably shouldn't say, but I had to look it up, and it's actually got a name to it, and it's called Januszian thinking. And it's that ability to look at a concept from both sides, and then sort of go through the rigor and interpretation of the problem to get to a solution. And before I let you answer, I just want to sort of illustrate a little bit of what I mean by that. Louis Pasteur, and even though he probably wasn't thinking this when he came across this, but the genesis of immunology was based on the fact that he could see in this Januszian way that a chicken, or in any animal that's sort of gone through a virus, can be both diseased and non-diseased at the same time. So it's that ability to look at a problem and go, okay, I can see both ends. What does that mean? Talk to us about that, because that's definitely something you do. Okay, so I don't think that I have thought about it like that before, but I definitely, you know, I can relate, and I love that, actually, thinking about two things existing, and I love the paradox. I love the juxtaposition. I love using analogies, and I love the whole sort of putting the protagonist sort of mindset at play. And maybe this comes from this idea that you always need an alternative, or there always is an alternative, and considering both ways, and whether it's the backup plan, whether it's plan B, but that notion of two things existing at the same time, and how then you can frame things to stimulate different thinking. And the idea of things are that, and there's a book, and it's called Not Impossible, right? So that juxtaposition of those two concepts. But I did, and I still do, love brain teasers. And so those, and it reminded me, I didn't understand it was actually a theory, but where you can see in a picture two images at once, you know, so do you see the brain tricks? And so I do love those brain teasers and riddles and thinking like that. Yeah, you know, in brand terms, there's this thing called brand intensity. And we sometimes use it. It's sort of looking for the tension in a brand. So one of the examples that we often talk about is like Marilyn Monroe, for example, who is really captivating in a strange way, and your mind doesn't really understand why, but she's got that sort of innocence and seductiveness at the same time. Those live equally at the same time. It's not quite the same thing, but that sort of idea of, you're looking at things from different angles is kind of interesting. So Janelle mentioned that Deborah Weil, the global CMO for General Motors, is on next. And, obviously from the outside in, like I watch you guys interact, and we're obviously on Teams all the time. And you just seem to be absolutely thriving. Why is that? Deborah's an experienced CMO, I get it, but you just seem to have this like amazing connection, intellectually. What's driving that?
So, interestingly, Deborah, she knows the business, and she makes it, her business to understand the complexities. And I watch her, taking on our MarTech IT challenges, and she gets like the detail, and she gets the big picture. And really she is putting marketing as a driving force in solving business challenges. And so, I think as we all reflect as marketers on how we are sort of transforming our craft, and the importance of knowing the business. And so sort of without even, a deliberate approach, and as you talked about how sort of I like to work in this, way of ideating, she'll like also pressure test something. And so, our style very much is I have lots of little short meetings with her, probably high frequency versus, it's not a 1 hour meeting. I'll probably meet with her, could be a few times a day, but like literally for like 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And I'll bounce something off of her, and then she'll come back and say, let's, she was actually doing a presentation, I won't say where, a few days ago, and she's like, we should weave in like some of those concepts and see how they play out. So she's great at, taking a concept, and then she'll start to then also, she's phenomenal at, aligning the organization. And so she'll start to then really showcase or, feed that and get feedback across leadership, across organization. But she's really putting marketing at the forefront of the growth curve, and really trying to spearhead how, marketing is at the forefront of the organizational transformation.
Yeah, she talks about profitable growth all the time. I mean, when she first joined, I remember hearing that term and going, we need to understand more about what that means. And it's absolutely transformed marketing, in my opinion. I mean, I look at where we were, 2 years ago and where we are now, this sort of emphasis on modern marketing and the discipline of modern marketing, and understanding what that means for the organization and how that plays both in marketing, but across the rest of the organization. You're definitely solving much more than marketing challenges, right? There's a lot of business challenges and opportunities, but I'm pretty sure we'll talk about that later. We're also going to talk about Super Bowl, which connects to this too.
Well, I want to say, I mean, so Deborah wanted a stock price on the CMO, like as a metric on CMO scorecard. And, we had lots of debate and discussion about, that's not really a marketing metric, right? But guess what? You look at, how we've kicked off the start of the year with GM and the focus and emphasis, and, from CES to the brand to Super Bowl, and the impact that, again, spontaneously coming from outside saying and attributing share price. And so I think, like you say, it's not something that a traditional, marketer would necessarily think about or put on, as a metric on a scorecard. So I just use that as an example.
Well, look, as an agency, we're obsessed now with watching. I mean, we should be anyway, right? But there's sort of this obsession. I'll get text messages during a meeting from someone going, we hit over $60. There's sort of this real obsession with tracking to that, which is a unique way to look at things. And we should all be thinking about that more. But she definitely moves quickly, like, extraordinarily quickly. Like she demands things, and you do the same. And I watch you operate. You move very, very quickly, and speed is definitely the friend of sort of entrepreneurial thinking. So how do you maintain that pace? Because it's relentless at GM, absolutely relentless.
So I love the Ventec story, and I love, Gerald Johnson's story about how we went to produce ventilators, and within, a few short weeks from the phone call we got to actually production. And I truly think that it needs to be the ethos, you know, of the company, and showing the speed and agility. And what rings true for me is, and sometimes you can't see the impact that you're having, but that story of where he talks about thinking about one ventilator equals one life, and just that meaningful difference. And so if we can turn that around, so ventilator speed, I think is a great sort of ethos for us to strive for, and really telling that human story.
Well, I mean, it's seeped into everything, right? And for those that are joining from McCann Group IPG, you've heard virtually in every business plan we do, we talk about velocity, but it just puts a whole new spin on it, right? That speed is not just about meeting deadlines; it's about, you know, creating meaningful change. And we are going to talk a little bit about 25 and 35 being big goals for General Motors. And you know, it seems far away, but that speed is so critical to get there because you're just moving so quickly all the time. You know, the other thing connected to speed, I guess, would be your bias for action. You know, speed comes with action, right? It's sort of it's inferred, like if you move quickly that you act, but that's got to be really difficult in an organization the size of General Motors. I mean, it's a corporate entity, right? So what's the solve for speed that you are required to have? And how do you solve for that in a corporate environment? Because it's got to be a challenge.
So and maybe my philosophy is commit and then figure it out. Set that big, hairy, audacious goal, yep. And then, you know, get alignment around that objective, and then figure it out. And if you think about the goal or the vision for GM of 000, I know how hard that was to sort of get approval to be out for Mary to even be able to say that, right? Because we don't know how we're going to get to 000. But when you look at startups, when you look at, you know, entrepreneurial, you know, businesses, the goal is very much, you know, at play and is the focus, and that's the starting point. And that does go against the grain somewhat. It goes against the normal business planning, budgeting process of dotting the I's and crossing every T and having the business case for the next 10 years completely, you know, projected. And so it definitely does create a tension, but I think it, you know, in the examples of, you know, far more contained marketing projects, it definitely is a great way to rally, you know, rally great work.
Yeah, I mean, there's an aspect of sort of bravery as well. You know, Mary coming out and saying that, it was not a well understood concept when it first came out. I mean, it sort of lands pretty quickly, but you know, there was no real backup up until that point. So we were out there saying it from a communication standpoint, and then transitioning so quickly to actually seeing some of this stuff land, seeing the vision outlined sort of in a very brave way, and then almost within a year, seeing it manifest very quickly into real activity and real commitments was really, I think, quite something. But I want to follow that string on entrepreneurial mindset and committing and acting, right? So particularly with a team, those types of actions or the way that you express those things can come across as sort of polarizing, right? You know, that clarity of intent and saying, if I'm saying 000, I mean it, we're going to go. And there's a lot of people sort of going, well, I'm not sure I agree with that. And that can come across as polarizing in the same way that a sort of founding member of an organization might feel the same way. So if you had to deal with that in marketing, and I guess the important sub question to that is has it affected you more as a woman?
Okay. So, you know, I love to use these analogies in culture, and I have, you know, quotes, but I love Hamilton, and there's a line that Lin-Manuel Miranda uses in Alexander Hamilton when he says, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? And whilst, yes, it's polarizing, I think that polarizing ideas can be really powerful. But the reality is that a lot of people don't like that status quo being upset. And so polarizing leaders, I think, tend to be more decisive because they have such strong values and beliefs that help them sort of manage that uncertainty. But I think it can't be taken too far, right? And so how do you use the sort of polarizing thoughts and ideas, but still be likable and not take it too far and with disregard? And how do you use it to engage in sort of the intellectual discussion? And in a way that's, you know, innovative and shaking things up rather than, you know, storming and pushing through. And so I'm a lot more conscious of, you know, of that. But I love the notion of those thoughts stimulating that discussion.
It's about idea, because I mean, if you look at leadership of old, I mean, I'm probably going to age myself, but been in the business for about 25 years, and you know, leadership, particularly in agencies back then, was, you know, dictatorial, polarizing because it was dictatorial, but it wasn't polarizing around ideas. It was polarizing around sort of management styles. And I think that's the challenge of the modern leader, is that as you start to really start to lead, that you have to be empathetic at the same time, have a strong point of view, and those things can be quite difficult to maneuver around, because it's very easy to fall back into, well, that's, you know, that's what I'm saying, just go and do it. You have to sort of get people to believe in the idea as well while you're doing it. It's the challenge of modern leadership, I guess. And
you did ask me about being a woman, and I think to that point, my experience definitely is that, and I've had feedback that my passion can be construed as emotional, and so that's definitely something I'm conscious of. But I'm like, it's far more now expected and acknowledged that the diverse opinions and even the way you go about things, I've never felt such receptivity, you know, within GM's leadership and culture. And so even though I'm conscious of it, I can't not be what I am. And so I would say that, yes, it's being used as a sort of, you know, as a stylistic thing, but it comes from the fire in my belly.
Well, I mean, there's also a democratizing effect of technology, right? I mean, the fact that we're showing up on a screen side by side, there's something quite interesting about that. It's a leveling of the playing field in a strange way, isn't it?
Yeah, and as we, you know, head back to, you know, what working from home looks like and how we, you know, engage, it is interesting to think about how these type of forums really put everyone at the equal. And in fact, we heard from a colleague who said that, you know, everyone has the same physical presence on Zoom. And so for somebody who doesn't have that, you know, who is petite and who would normally be sitting, you know, at the front of the room, to have that equal presence, it starts to reposition, you know, how people show up. And so turn your camera on and have that, you know, equal presence and voice.
It's fascinating because in the beginning of the pandemic, nobody from GM turned their cameras on. And as an agency, we actually made a conscious effort of like turning ours on to sort of prompt that. And it's amazing the difference it actually makes. So question from the side. And this comes back to sort of entrepreneurial thinking. Scarcity breeds creativity. Is that true or false?
Well, so Malcolm Gladwell, right? So, and the whole concept of constraints. And so I think that scarcity of time builds creativity because you've got to make decisions quickly. And so that creates that urgency and the agility. And I think is something that, you know, I definitely agree.
Yeah. So I've got two sort of follow-up questions to that. So the first is, I'm going to ask them at the same time, so I apologize for that. But can sort of being, because I do see you as entrepreneurial, right? You definitely have that sort of spirit, and you'll see it. You would have seen it in the questions that I've been asking. But can that skill be taught? I guess is the first question. And then the follow-up question is, I'm pretty sure that there are people out there who listening now who sort of fancy themselves or see themselves as entrepreneurs in a way. or at least spiritually an entrepreneur, but are in a corporate environment that may not feel the confidence to act like an entrepreneur in a corporate environment? What's your advice to them? So can it be taught? And what sort of give us your top 5? Give us your top 5.
Okay, so I think it is a combination of both. So no doubt you can be taught to be more intellectual, and you can be, you can learn. But I think that other things are very innate. So I think that imagination, which is so important for vision, is hard to learn. I think the fire in your belly and that passion is hard to learn. So I think it's a combination of both. But in terms of developing that mindset, I think that, and in fact, this is similar to some of the things that I spoke about when I was here talking about Maven. It is about putting yourself in new situations, that new business models, new experiencing it, and being curious and asking questions, being open to risk. We talked about visualizing. And I think the other really important thing is resting your brain, which I try and do. And I do also know that that's then when some of those ideas, and that's why, right, some of those ideas come at those bizarre times when you are resting your brain.
So that explains the 11 o'clock text messages with links on them, right?
And after a wine, right? So my mind is resting.
Right. We're going to come back to risk because I think it's a really interesting thing, and I'm going to bring up risk in the context of the Super Bowl, because it was at least on paper, sort of a risky concept. But I want to shift gears into General Motors and talk a little bit about what you're doing. So, look, I from the outside in, it's a daunting task, right? You've got this legacy brand that really hasn't seen anything significant behind it for decades and decades and decades. And you are in the process of refreshing it, sort of turning it into a consumer brand of some form. And you mentioned Maven, so I want to bring these two questions together. Maven failed, right? It's a fact, right? So, and you talked about how you learn from failure. You fought every battle until the very last. I think you were like practically turning the lights off on Maven. What have you brought from Maven into the General Motors brand? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I mean, it was such an incredible learning experience, and I was just surrounded by some of the smartest people that I, have ever worked for. Our team was, a third were from within GM, a third were from startups, and a third were from other sort of growth brands. But really, what it taught me was the whole VC venture capital perspective of the growth mindset. And that, double-digit, triple-digit growth, and the way they think about things and transform completely sort of standard processes. And so working alongside, the finance team to redesign the financial sheet, looking at it on $1 per mile or $1 per trip, so just transforming. But mind you, it was all about how do we get 2,000 driving members. And right. So very much, that growth mindset. So lots of invaluable, lessons, and I think the GM has taken on and will show up in other ways. But I loved it.
Well, and I would add, because I watch you do it all the time, consensus building. I mean, as an agency, we sort of sell you on an idea or a concept or something, right? Whatever it might be, and then you've got to go in, and unlike a vehicle brand or a service brand, where you have sort of control over the narrative over that brand, you're dealing with something that spans across the entire enterprise. We don't call GM the enterprise brand for nothing, right? So you've got to sell it from the top, from Mary and Mark, all the way across the organization into every single part of the organization. And that's that sort of ability to get consensus, quickly, and then be able to act on it, I think is maybe something else that you picked up from Maven. Observation. Yeah.
I think, and I think really, aligning to sort of the bigger overall narrative and understanding how it does affect the whole enterprise.
Right. And when I think about the reason why I said that is I'm thinking about the CES experience, right? Where again, you had so many different parts of the organization all sort of feeding into one project. and we had multiple objectives for CES, but what we definitely saw was both the technology community, but also Wall Street really responding well to that. So I'm going to hit you with a question about, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and I want to hear you sort of pitch to a growth investor why they should be buying GM.
Okay, so I think from a GM perspective, and what I've learned investors are looking for, it's the management team, you know, on the vision. And so I mean the very senior leader management team and commitment to the 000 future. It's our scale and the barriers to entry that really position us for market dominance in an all-electric future, and our fortress balance sheet, because having weathered you know, not just obviously the last 12 months, but being geared to still be profitable within sort of those challenges is definitely positioning us for the future.
Got it. Okay. Some fun stuff. So I would say what the highlight of my year last year was, it might have been just past 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, maybe, because I know we were sort of winding down for the week, where we got you called me, and then I sort of conferenced in the entire team. We'd just gotten the green light to shoot Will Ferrell, Awkwafina, and Keenan for the Super Bowl.
That was the first week of December, though, right? It wasn't.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. You're right. So it felt rough, and it was a good little injection of energy, and it was a surprise to us. I mean, you know, we took a couple of risks with that concept, but the thing that struck me about that process was just how it felt. It felt almost simple. Like, I don't know how, it felt almost like unnaturally smooth, right? Like everything, we sold you a concept without even knowing that Will Ferrell could appear. I mean, in retrospect, it was probably not the best thing to do, but it's amazing how it just sort of lined up. Every single barrier that we hit, it didn't take less energy, but it felt so good. And it just kept on ticking. You know, at one point we got a notification that we were going to have to close the shoot down halfway through. We were camped out at Will's house, and you know, it was like, what do we do? And that just got solved, and we just kept on moving on. How did it feel at GM? Because I know how it felt at the agency, and it felt good. How did it feel for you?
Yeah, it felt great. And I think that, you know, we joke about the timing, but I think it also shows that, you know, when it is that scarcity of time, right, and how fast that process went. But I think it's also a great example of, you know, commit and then figure it out, because like you said, that concept was presented all the way to the most senior leaders with, we didn't even know if Will could do it, and a very short timeline. But I think it just stems from like, it's the clarity of what the intent was. And there wasn't a whole strategic setup and you know, messaging that's going to follow required to understand what the idea was. And so I think, you know, really honing what that essence is made it easy, and it was risky. And I remember, you know, Mary saying, as long as I don't need to call, you know, the president or the prime minister of Norway on the Monday after the Super Bowl. And of course, you know, we'd already engaged with the policy team, and that was interesting. So the policy team then just, you know, were totally engaged in working with the ambassador of Norway here and taking it to the embassy in Oslo, and they could easily articulate the idea. And so I love that, because it was so easy, right? We had, I mean, who's ever gotten policy team working on, you know, on the briefing of a creative idea to, you know, to different stakeholders. So, and then just seeing the internal buzz that came with it. And so I think just that clarity of the idea and the purpose, and it was like, and we had fun doing it. Like, it was fun, and everybody laughed. You know, we were sort of on the phone thinking, how are, you know, our senior leaders going to react to, I'll punch you in the face, and you know, some of the ideas, but they were laughing. And so, you know, it was big learning, I think.
Well, to be fair, Mary did follow up that comment with, well, let's be honest, I'm just going to make Mark take the call anyway. So, you know, so I think she was avoiding that call regardless. But I think that we were terrified of the policy thing as well. I have to be honest with you. And when I think back about the first presentation and presenting to the SLT, it was a risk. I mean, you look at that conceptually, and you look at all the things that we wanted to do around it. Those were super risky. But again, going back to your confidence levels going in, and your comfort with tackling risky concepts, because the upside looked good. But again, we didn't really know that the upside was going to be good. There's a lot of legwork that goes into taking those risks, and you as an individual took a lot of that on your shoulders. Can you talk us through a little bit of that?
So, and I think that's, you know, GM, there's a, you know, we talk about looking ahead. And so, you know, really planning them, like looking for all of those, where that might come from, and actually turning it to our advantage. So instead of positioning it to Norway as, you know, here's a heads up and here's what we're doing, it's like, how do we actually turn it into something that is, you know, winning for them? And I think the competitive reaction that we got was really interesting, because a lot of the other, you know, automotive competitors got in on it, right? And so there was a board member of Tesla actually tweeted, you know, welcoming, you know, GM to the EV club, and you know what Audi did, but even internally, the reaction to that was, you know, we know that this movement is going to take, you know, everyone, and you know, the whole campaign is everybody in. And so the idea that we would even contemplate, you know, creating sort of a, you know, a sparring back and forth, and seeing that, you know, Audi buying in on it was actually helping our cause, I think, you know, reinforced that. But I think it was a lot of, you know, just turning everything into, you know, our advantage, and the fact that then the Prime Minister actually did, you know, send Will, you know, a pizza, and, you know, definitely amplified everything. So, but, you know, a tribute to, you know, the team and the thinking, and, you know, working to really be agile and blow that out.
Well, I mean, the brief is one line, so it's hard not to. One line with some parameters, and it's hard not to love that. So I got the feeling you're going to punt this question, so I'm just going to preempt it with that. But what have you got planned? What has the GM brain got planned for the balance of the year?
More of the same.
Well, I mean, what's so interesting about that is like the freshness of the humor. Like I would hate to lose that, because it just cuts through so quickly. You know, we're starting to have conversations with China as well about how humor can play a role, and that idea of also having a foil and something to compare yourself against. I mean, you talked a lot about the prep work that went into understanding what actually drove the EV adoption in Norway relative to what would need to happen here. So it felt almost so natural. Every step we took, there was sort of a natural resolve that made it easy to keep on selling it. So I think we're at 47 minutes, and we definitely want to open up for questions. I've tried to ask a couple of them as I'm going, but I'm going to close with sort of just a thought, and then ask you a question that's attached to the thought, because we have a lot of agency and client folks on the call. As an agency person, I'm going to channel both Chuck and Brad Emmett, who are the creative leads at McCann Detroit, that, you know, the agency and the work that the agency pushes out is only as good as the client that's sitting on the other end of the boardroom, which, by the way, flies in the face of what I was told growing up, which was there's no such thing as a bad client, right? But it does, you know, that level of risk, or the ability to be highly strategic for a client on the other end is really important for an agency, and we so appreciate it. And I guess the question is, what's the advice that you have for what marketers can do to be a great client? So what makes you a great client? What is going to help you become a great client?
Okay, well then I'm going to switch it back to you, because I was taught that you get what, you know, you deserve as a client. But I think it's clarity. I think it's clarity in whether it's a brief, whether it's feedback, whether it's getting it pushed through, you know, the organization. And, you know, I think it is like really listening, because, and what, the yes and I know that that's, you know, something that we have been trying to instill, you know, within GM, but I think it's the yes and so really looking for, you know, just that continuous, like feedback and improvement, and being part of the solution, and really just respecting, you know, that the art and the science, and so I would say clarity, but I'd love, so for all the clients in the room, I would love, you know, your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, again, I think we might have a couple of the creatives from McCann Detroit on it on the call, and I think they would agree with me when I say that part of it is just trusted space. I mean, we get into these really interesting conversations or debates around creativity, right? Where maybe let me go back a step. There's nothing more frustrating for an agency where, you know, you spend 45 minutes presenting something, hopefully quicker, because you should be able to present quicker than that. You think everything has gone great. You're getting a lot of good response on the call. You know, you feel like you're in a trusted space. Call closes down, and 25 minutes later, the account person's walking into the creative's office saying, oh, bad news, this didn't land, that didn't land, that didn't land. And I think that trusted space, that ability for the agency and whoever's sitting opposite them or with them can have that conversation real time and make it honest. You know, we've talked about this a couple of times about how to feedback, you know, and you go straight to, you acknowledge the creative, but then you go straight to debating in a very safe way. And I think magic happens when there is external pressure, because there's always external pressure, right? I mean, Deborah's always going to be pushing us to be better. She, you know, the constant refrain is push it, just keep pushing. But so those external pressures exist, but in that safe space, when it's, you know, when it's trust, so there's trust there, just magic happens, because you're constantly getting that feedback loop, and it's continuous as well. So those text messages at 11 o'clock at night, or the, you know, the constant iteration always manifests in better work. It absolutely always does. So I guess my advice would be just create a safe space, you know, because I think without a safe space, external from or internal from the pressures externally, you know, it's going to be really tough to get work that both client and agency are super proud of. So I've actually asked all the questions. There's one here that actually I think it'd be interesting to hear you talk through, which is, you know, there are folks from the ad selling and vendor community around Detroit, and the GM brand is a big haul. It's a big push, right? What are you looking for from the vendor community? And I would throw the agencies in there as well, if you like.
So we talked about, you know, solving the business challenges, and so it is our focus is on unleashing sort of this, and it does take, you know, everybody, and so we are, you know, relentlessly pushing to increase the adoption and consideration of EVs, and so there is a lot of there's some big challenges around that, right? So anything that's sort of normalizing electrification and ideas, whether it's infrastructure related, so it doesn't have to necessarily be a creative idea or, you know, or selling something, but, you know, as we undertake this, and again, it's, you know, it's for the good of everybody, right? But it is, how do we normalize? So solving the business challenge of normalizing electrification.
Perfect, great answer. And we're out of questions. I'm going to hand back to you, Janelle, unless you have any questions yourself.
I don't. Well, thank you so much, Megan and Grant, for today's discussion. You know, you've certainly given us a lot to think about in terms of how GM is modernizing their brand. And, you know, you're definitely seeing this translate into Wall Street with a tripling of the stock price in such a quick amount of time. I think today we certainly had a more elevated conversation as marketing as a discipline, but more importantly, you know, Grant's questions in our fireside chat it gave us a chance to get to know you, Megan, as a person and as a leader. And, you know, it's really clear knowing you that, you know, you bring your full authentic self to GM and the towers every day. You inspire those that are around you. I tend to subscribe to a philosophy, as we rise, we lift. And it's very clear that that's something that you do as well. So thank you for being you, and certainly inspiring those both at GM, your agency, and your partners. And thank you, Grant, for today's conversation. And I'd like to thank those of you at home who've joined us. We hope that you've enjoyed today's conversation with Grant and Megan. Make sure that you check out adcraft.org for the latest event updates. We also hope to see you next week as we close out this GM series with Deborah Wall, Global Chief Marketing Officer at GM. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again.